Although it has been decades and decades since the Papin sisters lived, the murders committed by their hands have haunted the world of true crime since. It's a cold-blooded murder story that has roots in class mistreatment combined with mental illness, an unsettling account of hatred, dysfunction, revenge, and punishment. This is 10-Minute Murder.
10-Minute Murder contains depictions of actual crimes. What you are about to hear is real and violent in nature. Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. My name is Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for being here. And do me a favor and check where you are listening right now. Are you subscribed? Quickly hit that button because when you are a subscriber to 10-Minute Murder, you won't miss any of the episodes throughout the week. You open up your listening app, whichever one that is, and boom, there are the episodes. It's completely free. Many shows are moving to this paywall situation and only making their best content available for free. And the only thing I ask is that you just sit through a few commercials. You can skip them if you want to. You can also connect with 10-Minute Murder in the comfort of your own Facebook or Instagram accounts. Just search in the search bar of whatever app you're trying to find it in, and it'll pop right up. Or the show notes of this episode, I'll leave links so you can connect to social media for 10-Minute Murder. Now, let's talk about the Papin sisters. The Papin sisters grew up in villages around Le Mans in western France. Christine, the elder of the two, was born March 8, 1905. 7 years later, Leah was born September 15, 1911. Christine and Leah also had an older sister. Her name was Amelia, but she was not tied to the friendship that these two fostered. Even so, many years apart in age, the two younger sisters had an undeniable bond that lasted a lifetime. The three Papin sisters grew up in a dysfunctional family full of hatred and addiction. All three of the girls were raised by Clemence and Gustave Papin, who themselves lived very troubled lives. With the marriage facing hardships, Gustave was a heavy alcoholic and often had violent outrages with Clemence and the girls. And apparently the mother cared very little for the girls during the time that she was involved in their life. By age 10, Amelia had been raped by her father, Gustave. Outraged, Amelia's mother admitted her to an orphanage to prevent her from seducing her father any further. You heard me right. 10-year-old Amelia sent to an orphanage by her mother so that she couldn't further seduce her father. And surprisingly, you'll see that this would be the best life that any of the girls would have. Christine and Leah were left to fend off their horrible parents on their own without Amelia. They both witnessed their parents' violent outrages and arguments during their divorce early in the girls' childhood and had to endure various forms of molestation. Their parents eventually did divorce, allowing their two remaining girls to be admitted to a mental institution to deal with their leftover trauma and childhood misbehavior. And this is where their sister Amelia leaves the story. She became a nun at a monastery and lived out her days there. In the mental institution, the bond of Christina and Leah grew even stronger. They barely spent any time apart, even leading the staff to believe that they were telepathic after seeing them able to communicate without using words. After the release from the hospital, the now adult sisters needed to find a suitable job to support themselves. They were hired by maids by a rich and prosperous family, the Lancelins. The sisters initially found the job to be suitable. They worked hard to keep the house tidy and please their employers. They had also formed a bond with the family's daughter, Genevieve. But as you can guess, what seemed like a great initial opportunity quickly turned sour. Mrs. Lancelin eventually fell victim to crippling depression and used her maids as an outlet for her mental illness. The woman, who was originally a thoughtful boss, turned out to be critical and bitter, never satisfied with their housemaids' work. Christine and Leah were subject to horrible working conditions that drove them nearly insane all over again. 14-hour workdays, 6 days of the week. The girls were at the mercy of Mrs. Lancelin, who was very meticulous and easily upset when met with complications. Both Christine and Leah faced physical abuse, such as pinching, during their time as maids for the Lancelins. If Mrs. Lancelin didn't like the way that they had done something, she would pinch them Even then, when the girls kept their distance from nearly everyone else, they were always found together. Christine was Leah's safe spot, and it was the same the other way around. It wasn't for many more years until someone realized this attachment may have been unhealthy. Years passed with the abusive conditions continuing behind closed doors until February 2nd, 1933. This regular Thursday, the Lancelins had plans to attend a dinner at a friend's house. Monsieur Lancelin was supposed to meet his wife and daughter at their family home, where they would then make their way to have dinner together. Mrs. Lancelin and Genevieve had been out shopping all day and were met with darkness when they made it home early that evening. Literal darkness. The whole house was dark. Christine and Lee greeted them at the door per usual. They explained to their superiors that there had been a power outage in the home and they had not yet been able to fix it, but it wouldn't be much longer. The sisters also went on to admit the failure was on behalf of their own actions. This news angered Mrs. Lancelin, causing her to start a violent fit of rage against the two maids, attacking them on the main floor of the home. Christine and Leah attacked back, physically assaulting both the mother and the daughter. Christine was quick to find weapons and ordered Leah to continue assaulting the women. Mrs. Lancelin and Genevieve were hit over the head and mutilated in their own lobby. For approximately 2 more hours, the Papin sisters continued their assault. Sometime later that evening, Monsieur Lancelin returned home to meet his family before the dinner party. He, too, entered a dark home. When he could not find his wife and daughter, he had assumed they had already made their way to dinner, so he left on his own. However, his family was not at the party either. Surprised, Monsieur Lancelin turned around to go home, worried about the whereabouts of his wife and daughter. But this time, he was locked out of his own house when he arrived. The front door was bolted from the inside out, so he called the police to investigate. When the police arrived, they faced a scene that would stick with them forever. Police saw the bloody and battered bodies of Mrs. Lancelin and Genevieve. The two victims had been tortured and murdered. Their eyes had been gouged out, their faces beaten, slashed with knives, and left naked on display. Both victims were smeared with their own blood. Strange enough, the rest of the house left no evidence pointing to any culprit. The Papin sisters cleaned up to have it pristine and clean, just the way it was before the murder. Regardless of their great job cleaning, the sisters confessed to everything. The police met them upon arrival at the house, where they made no attempt to deny what they had done. Christine and Leah were sent to prison. Different prisons. Finally separated after a long life of being emotionally attached to each other, they were having a hard time apart. Before going to trial, Christine gouged out her own eyes while facing a severe mental breakdown. Both sisters were tried in court and charged with varying offenses. Authorities determined that Christine was the leading force and had taken her sister under her wing, guiding her through the vicious acts. As the mastermind, Christine faced a much worse sentence than her sister. Leah was made to seem like simply an extension of her sister, with no traits true to herself. After extensive debating, psychologists involved in the court trials decided that Christine and Leah were likely facing mental disorders affecting their decision-making, and that should be looked into. It was then found that the Papin family had a long history of various mental illness. Christine and Leah were suspected of suffering from shared paranoid disorder, which occurs when a group or pair of people are separated from society and one partner dominates the rest. This was likely a cause of their murderous outrage and Leah's role in the crime. Christine was sentenced to death, which ended up being changed to life in prison. She passed away in 1937 due to her unhealthy habits and inability to tend to her own health needs. Leah was sentenced to just a few years behind bars and was released in 1941. Now a free woman, Leah started a new life for herself after her release on her own and out of her sister's reach. She created a new identity and got a regular job so that she could support herself. It seems like it may be the only time in her life that she was completely in control herself. There is some uncertainty about when Leah passed away, supposedly around 1980, but some witnesses claim to have seen her as recently as 2001. The horrific acts of violence at the hands of the Papin sisters serves as kind of an example of the effects of abuse. If Christine and Leah grew up with caring parents and were not abused by their employer, would things have been different? That's today's 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. Thanks for listening today. And if you have a story you'd like for me to possibly take a look at covering, you can email it to 10minutemurder@gmail.com. You can also send it to me on social media just as easy, but we need to be connected first. So just click the link in the show notes of this episode, or it's even easier if you want to go to Facebook or Instagram, just type it into the search bar. It'll pop right up and you can follow the show there. And some of you have been sending me messages and emails wondering how Harper Jane is doing. Harper, my chunky Labrador retriever that thinks she's my shadow. And she's great. She is currently laying on top of my feet, asleep, and thank goodness not snoring. And I don't know how she sleeps with me talking so loud, but she's doing it. Hey, before you go, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening right now, and you will never miss another episode. And if you have friends that are into brief true crime stories, tell them about 10-Minute Murder. Thanks for listening. Have a good night.